May 16, 1960, the Élysée Palace in Paris. Four leaders of the most powerful nations on Earth sit down in the same room for the first time. President Charles de Gaulle of France is hosting. British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan is there. President Dwight Eisenhower of the United States is there. And Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev is there, accompanied by Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko and Defense Minister Rodion Malinowski. Few rooms in Cold War history ever held more political power. This summit was supposed to be the moment that changed everything. Disarmament, Berlin, a possible test ban treaty, the beginning of something the world had been waiting for since Hiroshima. Instead, what happened in that room in the next 3 hours ended all of it. This is the documented story of what happened when Eisenhower refused to apologize to Khrushchev for the U-2 spy plane, and why that refusal collapsed what many expected to be the most important summit of the Cold War. To understand what was at stake in Paris, you have to understand what the U-2 program actually was and why its exposure was so devastating. Since 1956, the Central Intelligence Agency had been flying a remarkable aircraft called the U-2 over Soviet territory. Designed by Kelly Johnson's Skunk Works team at Lockheed, the U-2 was essentially a powered glider built to fly at approximately 70,000 feet, well above the ceiling of any Soviet interceptor aircraft, and initially above the reach of Soviet surface-to-air missiles. Flying at approximately 70,000 feet with a range of about 2,950 miles, the aircraft carried some of the finest aerial cameras ever built. The cameras could resolve objects as small as 2.5 feet from that altitude. Between 1956 and 1960, these overflights had been enormously valuable. American officials and critics of the Eisenhower administration were warning publicly about a growing missile gap, claiming the Soviets had achieved nuclear superiority. The U-2 photographs directly contradicted this. They showed what Soviet missile capabilities actually were, and they showed the intelligence community that the missile gap was not what critics feared. Eisenhower personally authorized each overflight. He knew exactly what the program was and accepted the political risk it carried. He also accepted the personal cost of saying nothing publicly to defend himself against missile gap accusations, because revealing the truth would have meant revealing the existence of the program.
The Soviets knew the overflights were happening. Their radar tracked every U-2 that crossed their airspace. But their fighters and early surface-to-air missiles could not reach the altitude. They could do nothing except protest through diplomatic channels and push their scientists for a technological breakthrough. By 1960, that breakthrough had arrived. The S-75 Dvina, known by its NATO designation as the SA-2, was a surface-to-air missile system capable of reaching the U-2's operational altitude. In preparation for the Paris summit, U-2 flights over the Soviet Union had been suspended. Both governments were trying to create the right atmosphere for productive talks. Then someone made a fateful decision to resume flights. On May 1, 1960, CIA civilian pilot Francis Gary Powers took off from Peshawar, Pakistan, in a U-2 spy plane. His mission was to fly approximately 3,000 miles across the Soviet Union, photographing ICBM sites near Sverdlovsk and Plesetsk, and land at Bodo, Norway. He never arrived. Near the city of Sverdlovsk in the Ural Mountains, a Soviet SA-2 missile detonated near his aircraft. Powers ejected and parachuted safely to the ground, where he was captured by the KGB. The Soviets reportedly fired 14 SA-2 missiles in the attempt. In the confusion, one Soviet interceptor pilot, Sergei Safronov, was also shot down and killed by friendly fire while trying to intercept Powers. The plane crashed, but large parts of it were recovered, including the aerial camera system with its film. The CIA's cover story immediately fell apart under the weight of what the Soviets had in hand. NASA issued a press release claiming the U-2 had been conducting weather research and may have strayed off course after the pilot reported difficulties with his oxygen equipment. The CIA even painted NASA markings onto another U-2 and showed it to the press to bolster the cover story. But Khrushchev had been waiting. He announced on May 5th that an American plane had been shot down over Soviet territory, but initially said nothing about the pilot. On May 7th, he revealed that Powers was alive, had confessed, and that espionage equipment had been recovered from the wreckage. The cover story collapsed completely. The wreckage, the cameras, the film, and the captured pilot made the weather research claim impossible to sustain. Eisenhower was forced to admit the truth. He did something no president had done before. He publicly acknowledged that the United States had been conducting intelligence overflights of a foreign country, and that he personally had authorized them. This public acknowledgement was itself remarkable. Eisenhower did not hide behind the CIA or claim ignorance. He said directly that he bore responsibility for the program because gathering intelligence was a necessity in the Cold War context. This admission stunned many observers and changed the nature of what the Paris summit would become. Khrushchev had a political problem of his own. He had staked his reputation inside the Soviet leadership on the concept of peaceful coexistence with the West. He had visited the United States the previous September in a landmark trip. He had met Eisenhower at Camp David. He had told Soviet audiences that the American president was a man of peace. Now, an American spy plane had been caught flying 1,200 miles inside Soviet territory on May Day, the most important holiday in the Soviet calendar. His internal critics, including hardliners who had always opposed his outreach to the West, were watching to see how he would respond. Khrushchev had to choose between the summit he wanted and the domestic political position he needed. He chose to make demands. On May 15th, the day before the summit formally opened, Khrushchev visited de Gaulle at the Élysée Palace, accompanied by Gromyko, his ambassador, and Defense Minister Malinovsky. According to de Gaulle's own memoir and the FRUS record of the meeting, Khrushchev launched into an attack on the United States and handed de Gaulle a written declaration. The declaration stated that unless President Eisenhower publicly apologized for the U-2 incident, announced that those responsible would be punished, and stated that no U.S. spy planes would overfly Soviet territory again, he would take no part in the summit conference. De Gaulle passed the message to Eisenhower and Macmillan that evening. The morning of May 16, 1960, the four leaders assembled in the Élysée Palace for what the declassified FRUS record describes as the meeting of chiefs of state and heads of government, beginning at 11 in the morning. The room contained, along with the four leaders, their senior foreign policy officials. From France, Prime Minister Debré and Foreign Minister Couve de Merville. From Britain, Foreign Secretary Selwyn Lloyd. From the United States, Secretary of State Christian Herter and Secretary of Defense Thomas Gates. From the Soviet Union, Foreign Minister Gromyko and Defense Minister Malinovsky. An American interpreter named Okalovsky was present, as was a Soviet interpreter and other supporting staff. De Gaulle opened the meeting. According to the declassified record, he stated, "We are gathered here for the summit conference. Yesterday, I received a statement from one of the participants, Mr. Khrushchev, which I conveyed verbally to the other participants, President Eisenhower and Mr. Macmillan. Does anyone therefore wish to say anything?" Khrushchev immediately asked for the floor. So did Eisenhower. De Gaulle suggested perhaps they should hear President Eisenhower first. Khrushchev pushed back. The declassified record shows his response. "I was the first to ask for the floor, and I would like my request to be granted."
De Gaulle let Khrushchev speak. What followed was one of the most extraordinary public confrontations of the Cold War. Khrushchev read from the same statement he had delivered to de Gaulle the day before, now directed formally at all three Western leaders. The CIA declassified a copy of this statement, transmitted by TASS on May 16, 1960. In it, Khrushchev described the U-2 mission as an inadmissible, provocative act. He said the United States had committed an act of aggression against the Soviet Union. He demanded that Eisenhower condemn the overflights, guarantee they would never happen again, and punish those responsible. He stated explicitly that he would not participate in the summit conference unless these conditions were met. He also announced he was withdrawing the invitation he had extended to Eisenhower to visit the Soviet Union.
According to Walter Cronkite's contemporary account for NPR, Khrushchev accused Eisenhower of basing American foreign policy on treachery. UPI's Stuart Hensley, reporting from the palace, described the developments as brutally dramatic. Macmillan attempted to find a way through. He proposed procedural solutions, tried to find language that might satisfy Khrushchev's demands without requiring a formal American apology. His efforts would fail. According to contemporary reporting, Khrushchev appeared to have concluded that taking a hard public line served his interests better than continuing the negotiations. Then Eisenhower spoke. He told the room that the overflights of the Soviet Union had been suspended for the duration of his administration. He would not fly U-2s over the Soviet Union again. This was a genuine concession, a public promise from the President of the United States, but it was not an apology. It did not condemn the program, it did not acknowledge wrongdoing, and it did not punish anyone. Eisenhower cited the necessity of intelligence gathering in the Cold War context as the reason the program had existed. He refused to apologize for doing what he believed was his duty to American security. According to the declassified FRUS record, when Eisenhower refused to accede to Khrushchev's demands, Khrushchev announced that he would not participate in the talks. Observers in the meeting documented what followed. According to Walter Cronkite's account, Eisenhower and Khrushchev never shook hands when they met inside the Élysée Palace. The two men simply rose from their chairs when the session ended and left without a greeting. The meeting lasted just over 3 hours. The first one out was Khrushchev, who Cronkite described as looking flushed. The next one out was Eisenhower. The summit that was supposed to change the course of the Cold War effectively collapsed in that room at the Élysée Palace before it had truly begun. The conference was formally adjourned the following day, May 17.
That afternoon, Khrushchev held a press conference. He repeated his demands and announced that the Soviet Union could not negotiate under the current conditions. He returned to East Berlin on May 20th and delivered a lengthy speech placing the blame for the collapse of the summit entirely on the United States. On the same day, Prime Minister Macmillan reported to the House of Commons that despite his efforts, Khrushchev had not attended meetings subsequent to the one on May 16th. On May 31st, President de Gaulle broadcast to the French nation, stressing that while the U-2 flight was at least ill-timed, it was not sufficient reason for the Soviet premier's behavior. Eisenhower reported to the American nation on the summit on May 25th. He emphasized that he had assured the Soviet Union that U-2 flights would not be continued, but that this had not been enough for Khrushchev. He described the events as they unfolded in Paris, stressed the solidarity of the British and French at the conference, and concluded that Soviet intransigence was responsible for the failure of the summit. These public statements are documented in the public papers of the Presidents of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower, 1960-61, pages 437 to 445. Francis Gary Powers was tried in the Soviet Union on August 17 to 19, 1960.
He was convicted of espionage and sentenced to 10 years of confinement, including 3 years in prison and 7 years of hard labor. He served less than 2 years of his sentence. On February 10, 1962, Powers was exchanged for Soviet intelligence officer Rudolf Abel on the Glienicke Bridge between West Berlin and East Germany. Abel had been arrested in New York in 1957. Powers later wrote a memoir of the experience, Operation Overflight, published in 1970.
The consequences of what happened in that room at the Élysée Palace extended far beyond the collapsed summit. The Paris failure ended any possibility of a comprehensive settlement of the Berlin question before Kennedy took office. It set back arms control negotiations significantly. It damaged Khrushchev's domestic political position and strengthened the hand of Soviet hardliners who had always opposed peaceful coexistence with the West. For Eisenhower personally, it represented the bitterest disappointment of his presidency. He had spent 8 years trying to prevent a nuclear war and believed a summit agreement was within reach. The U-2 incident took it away in the final months of his time in office. Eisenhower's decision not to apologize was consistent with his entire approach to the Cold War. He believed that showing weakness, making concessions under pressure, or publicly condemning programs he had authorized as necessary for American security would undermine the credibility of the United States in the eyes of both adversaries and allies. He had accepted years of public criticism over the supposed missile gap rather than revealed the U-2 program's existence and findings. He was not going to apologize for running it. That calculation had a cost. The summit collapsed in that room at the Élysée Palace on May 16, 1960, and with it, the best opportunity Eisenhower believed he had to ease Cold War tensions on his own terms.
This video is based on documented historical sources, including the declassified record of the May 16, 1960 Paris Summit session published in Foreign Relations of the United States, Volume 9. Khrushchev's statement transmitted by TASS and preserved in CIA declassified files. First-hand memoirs by Eisenhower in Waging Peace. Khrushchev in Khrushchev Remembers, The Last Testament. Harold Macmillan in Pointing the Way, Charles de Gaulle in Memoirs, diplomat Charles Bolin in Witness to History, Francis Gary Powers in Operation Overflight, and Michael Beschloss's scholarly biography, Mayday, alongside Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearings and contemporary reporting by UPI and Walter Cronkite. All quotes and events are drawn from verified primary sources and first-hand accounts. Historical interpretations may vary among scholars and historians. This content is intended for educational purposes.